Okay.
Hey, Julie Enslow.
Okay, everybody. Good to see you all. And we're starting our monthly gathering here of 350 Milwaukee. Just a brief overview of the state of the climate. This has been quite a month with these terrible floods in Pakistan that they say it's going to take at least 6 months for them to recede. And there's terrible heat waves throughout Europe and the droughts and the fires in Spain and Portugal and southern France. And then it really hit home for me this past week. I have kids out in California, and my daughter's ranch, that's about an hour east of Sacramento up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas, had forced evacuation orders because of the mosquito fire that is near them. And they were on vacation at the time and realized there were these orders, and they had to call friends to help evacuate the animals, just horses and dogs and cats. And it was a nightmare. When they did get home, they found that they could get through the barriers because my son-in-law is a fireman volunteer. And now the winds have kind of stayed blowing in the correct direction. So they're not directly threatened, and there's a lot of smoke, but they're okay. And it looks like they're going to be all right. But
That's good news.
it hits home in many ways for many of us. And we are very fortunate where we're living right here in Wisconsin to really have a beautiful mild summer and no fire, no serious droughts, at least in our area, the southeast of the state, and rather cool weather. And we're blessed not to experience what most of the rest of the world is at the moment. But we contribute to so much of what's happening around the world, and that's why it's everyone's responsibility. And one of the ways that we contribute in this region is through these pipelines that come through the upper Midwest from Canada that bring the fossil fuels, the gas and the oil and through to the areas where they're then shipped out to other parts of the country and the world. And so we do have a lot of organizing we need to do right here to make a positive impact on the planet instead of a negative one. Tonight, we're really privileged to have this speaker, Paul DeMain, who's been an activist in the Native American communities for many, many years, originally from Milwaukee, I guess, was born here in Milwaukee, but works now, I believe, with Winona LaDuke and Honor the Earth, the environmental group out of, I thought it was Minnesota, but I think it's a national group now. And me, a big introduction for him is going to be by our own Jill Ferguson, who is known as a badass grandma from the Alpha, that she was given that name by the young people that she was demonstrating with up in the Minnesota, the Line 3 demonstrations, when she was there many times and was arrested and had many stories to tell us in the past about those activities. And she's still at it and is now very active with the Line 5 issue, and has been working with Paul DeMain, and will be the one who will introduce him. And then we'll hear some from Jill also, conversation tonight. So Jill, there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. When I spoke with Greg earlier today, he asked if I wanted to do would do the introduction of Paul, and I kind of choked on that. I'm like, oh, well, I don't know how in the world you could put into a paragraph about Paul. And I read the wonderful article from PBR, and I suggest everybody read it. But I thought, instead of my rambling on and on about him, I just want to say that you all are in for a real treat. I've only known Paul for a little over a year, and I honestly can't express truly how humbled and honored I am to now call him a friend. And you know, his indigenous name Skabewis means the messenger, and he is all of that. I'm just been so enriched by his stories, his knowledge, his teachings, and I'm so excited that y'all get to hear from him tonight. So I'm going to take it away, and Paul, please.
Well, miigwech badass. Buju akina and dinaway maganaduk onish shin minogiji gatanis good day. Skabewis Indigenous cause. My Anishinaabe name is Skabewis, meaning the messenger in basic English, but it does come with a few other responsibilities. Makwa Indode, my family tree is through the Bear Clan and the Oneida Nation, and I'm of Ojibwe descent, living on the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation and on Madeline Island during the summers. So I have the pleasure of being surrounded by an awful lot of water between being in Sawyer County on the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation near the Chippewa Flowage, and Grindstone and Lakudere are nearby down the road here. And lately I've been spending a lot of time on the island surrounded by water, and it's always good to come from, I think, a community that appreciates water in a very deep sense. Not that farmers don't, and not that urban people don't, but I think people living on the water, I think it just brings them that much closer. Now, deferring to the people who are witnessing downpours and wicked 500 and 1,000 year storms, and people who are worried about the North Pole warming up, and the Australian fires and California fires and drought, and the Southwest and Las Vegas almost being out of water, and all the things that are going on, it's really obvious that it's time that the human race really stand up and begin changing its philosophy toward the resources here that sustains them on a regular basis. And so I am the chairman of the board of directors for Honor the Earth. I have about 8 organizations that I still belong to out of about 26 a few years ago. I'm a retired businessman that had a payroll of 53 people on the Lakudere Ojibwe Reservation at one point with the Indian Country Communications Network. So I had a chance to cover Indigenous affairs throughout the world and be involved in investigations that not only freed other people because of our results and work, but put people in jail who committed crimes within our community. And so you get the good and the bad and the ugly reviews at times. And so I noticed you had a link to something ages ago that happened to me, but that's part of my experience and helps form my worldview of things. Talking about what we need to do here, I've come to believe that what I can do in a certain way is to just send my appreciation out to everyone that's here tonight. And I send my appreciation out to all those people who've been involved with recent events in Water is Life concert up in Duluth, the Mackinac Straits Festival for Water, and Communities United by Water in the Chequamegon Bay area. The organization is not for sale, 350.org everywhere, Madison, Milwaukee, wherever it might be, all the other organizations. And, you know, really express my appreciation and say that thank you. We thank every person that has ever written a letter. We thank everyone that's ever talked to a politician or a religious leader. I frankly don't care if you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Mennonite or whatever it might be. If you're adding to the prayers and to the strength and looking toward the earth for the strength that gives us on a regular basis, I want to say thank you for doing that. We appreciate that. I want to thank every person that ever donated some money to help educate other people or provide assistance toward defendants, 187 of them in northern Minnesota that are still dealing with cases. Most of those are now people who will not plead guilty to the charges and will go to trial. And some of them face serious felony charges and trumped up charges and all kinds of charges that are really unjust. And I can give you a good example real quickly with Winona LaDuke. She had a recent court hearing in which 2 charges of trespassing on infrastructure lands, which would be the Line 3 easement in northern Minnesota, were dismissed because as a treaty citizen under the 1855 treaty, she has a right to access public property. She has a right to access her resources that are on that public property. That's what the treaty and the contract with the US government says. That's what it means. And so she has a right. And the judge dismissed both trespassing charges. The remaining charge is resisting arrest. And in the judge's determination, he said, you can be arrested for obstructing or resisting an illegal arrest. And I don't know exactly what it was that she was charged with specifically, but it had maybe something to do with that she didn't unchain herself at a certain time because the key to unchain her wasn't there and it wasn't available anyway. But those are the kinds of defenses and cases, and there's numerous cases working their way through the courts. You know, I want to thank anyone that's ever cooked for a water protector. It's really great to know that there's people who, when there are marches in northern Wisconsin and caravans across the state stopping in cities, that people will come out of their homes with fruit and salads and come to community feast and potlucks and ready to organize around there. We got to remember to thank each and every one of you who's ever gotten out of a little box and knocked on doors and registered people to vote. It's really, really important because it's not just about global warming and the future of the earth. It's about women's rights, and it's about voting, and it's about so many issues that are important. And in many cases, they're tied together. You know, I see the treatment of women in generally tied to how the earth is treated, which is a feminine entity in Ojibwe spiritual thought. And so I want to thank anyone that's ever done any of those things. You know, someone held up their hand and said, how can I help? You know, and I said back, what do you do? And they say, well, I'm a photographer. I says, take photographs, go out to the line and look around. 80% of all the leaks that are discovered by people just roaming around Enbridge pipelines, and there's plenty of them. And so we just want to remember to thank water protectors for everything they've done to change the political nature and bring this issue to the forefront, in which earlier this year, for the 5 Democratic candidates in debate, they were all Southern Wisconsin candidates. Tommy Nelson over in Green Bay was the furthest one north, debated, and 4 of the 5 were all generally opposed for the Line 5 reroute, which means that the political awareness of Southern Wisconsin politicians is very good. And that bodes well, because as you get into northern Wisconsin, we have our sectors that are that's Trump country as well. But frankly, a lot of Trump country is just developing. It's like Caucasians who can afford to move into northern Wisconsin and get away from the blacks and the Indians and the gays and uppity women and everything else. And they can go to northern Wisconsin and they can put fatigues on and play army men in the woods, kind of a thing. But that really is in part of the dynamic of what's happened in northern Wisconsin from the time when there was milk farmers and loggers and hunters and fishermen and people really living off the earth in a self-sufficient way to a great extent. And a lot of it's still there in the communities in the Squamigan Bay area where Line 5 runs through. You see great organizations like Not for Sale, which I believe has a website, Communities United by Water .com or .org, communitiesunitedbywater.org, if you want information on the pipeline battle on Line 5 and 3 and Mackinac Straits, has good updating information. But part of the responsibility with both organization Honor the Earth that I oversee, which is really an international organization, we're doing things in Canada, and typically our organization is focused on supporting artisans in communities, musicians. We've funded gardens, we've funded water well projects, we've funded seed gathering, collecting, disbursement. We've held Indigenous agricultural workshops in different places. Our organization is involved with non-THC hemp products, and we're producing hemp in northern Minnesota for the 7th or 8th year, and have a contract with Patagonia to weave Navajo Shero sheep hairs into hemp fibers and make the softest Navajo wool mixture blankets in the world in the future. And people at Patagonia say if we can provide hemp to them, they won't have to buy it from China. And I think that's bringing jobs back to northern Minnesota. And those are the kinds of things we do. We own a solar panel making industry in northern Minnesota that employs now 13 or 14 people, and that's beginning to take off. We grow purple Ojibwe potatoes, and we grow 68 different varieties of corn, from Sac and Fox popcorn to Shawnee Eagle corn to white flint corn from the Iroquois Confederacy that came from New York to Green Bay when the Oneidas migrated here. So I'm involved in a lot of things and a lot of organizations, and I got my fingers into a lot of things, and all of them seem to rub up against the battle to look at the world in a different way and try to reject some of these extractive industries and foreign corporations that come in and utilize the resources of this country, because it seems to be easier to buy public policy and politicians in the United States. And so there's times when I like to segregate the big battle. My concern about global warming is way up there as a big hub, and I'm worried about floods, and I'm worried about PCBs and mercury and walleye. I'm worried about forever chemicals in the other fish on Lake Superior that from a leak over in Superior at the oil refinery system there a couple of years ago, that the DNR says wasn't a big leak because it just went into the lake and was dispersed, is now showing up in the minnows and other fish of that area, causing warnings. I'm worried about chronic wasting disease and the lack of wolves to help monitor that, because we don't have chronic wasting disease in those areas where we have good wolf population. And so we're looking for that balance. We're looking for self-sufficiency. We're looking for economic stimulus. We want to put some of the things that are the traditional spiritual philosophy, cultural philosophy, our community back to work in a good way. In so many cases, it's Indigenous people who seem to be the last line of defense on some of these things. And we ought not be relied upon. The non-Indian community should, in some cases, they're saying, where are our Indians and where are our reservations? Because they're battling all these things, and we need to wait for them to step up to the cause, and lead it. And we ought not to be that, because treaties are treaties between two different parties, and Ojibwe people not only have treaty rights, but they have obligations to live up to the things that they ceded to the United States government, like lands, and allow those things to take place. But the US government and its citizens also has a right to uphold those treaties for as long as the grass grows and the rivers flow, or 60 days, whichever comes first kind of philosophy. And so we're arguing in federal courts in Minnesota with a rights of nature case. Winona LaDuke was declared guardian ad litem of the Shell River by the White Earth Ojibwe tribe and the 1855 Treaty Authority, and has filed a lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers in the state of Minnesota for water. We're ruining the water system. I mean, in the middle of a drought, their engineers sat down and says, oh, we only asked for 500 million gallons of water, and to be able to dewater it. And dewatering is a process whereas you put a pipeline in, you're taking water out of ditches, you're moving water around, there's cleaning and washing, there's water washing of equipment, there's all kinds of water displaced. So it's taken out, and they originally asked for 500 million gallons to be utilized in that dewatering process on Line 3 project. And in the middle of June or July last year, they said we made a mistake. It was supposed to be 5 billion. And you would have thought it would have been the other way around during a massive drought, but it was actually in the opposite direction, where they ended up with 500 billion gallons of water dewatering capability. And it pretty much probably helped contributed to the decline of the watersheds around the White Earth Reservation and Rice Lake that you could walk on. You could go get rice if you had snowshoes and walk out there and snap rice if it was still alive out there. In addition to that, we had 3 aquifer breaches. You shouldn't have one aquifer breach. It's a engineering nightmare. We've talked with hydrologists and other people that said that the aquifer breach, which then broke this aquifer and began depressurizing it by LaSalle, was actually supposed to be plugged at one time by Enbridge, pumping millions of gallons of grout in there with other chemicals that was supposed to, when it mixes with the water, it gets hard, and they had to pump it in because what they did is when they were putting the line in, if you can see my hands here, they added metal sheets to each side as they pumped the water out of it, and they had a permit that allowed them to go 18 feet. And on the site, the contractors and bridges decided that they were going to go 29 feet because they wanted to do it. They did it. And then they basically didn't tell anyone for 6 months that that was going on. And what's ironic about it is that Enbridge has paid out something like $8 to $9 million for payment for law enforcement officials, time and a half, double time, travel, guns, ammunition. There was all kinds of things that they requested that was hardware, and in some cases that was denied. But all the police departments of northern Minnesota have any toys that they want on behalf of Enbridge. It was bought and paid for by them. And we had DNR agents from Minnesota lined up, preventing water protectors from slowing down the job sites while Enbridge was covering up major engineering breaches. And I was told you shouldn't have one aquifer breach, and they had 3, and 2 of them are still running. The LaSalle is running again. The one on the Fond du Lac Reservation is still running, and the rice beds in that area and in the wetlands are not functioning properly this year. Thank you, Foreign Corporation. It's the kind of argument that Indigenous people were making on both the Dakota Access Line, which was truncated by the Trump administration waiving rules and regulations, and even Line 3, where during the legal process and hearing process of getting the permit, the state of Minnesota would never discuss treaty rights because, Indian tribes don't sit down at coffees and talk with Enbridge over coffee in a local community. And Indian tribes don't sit down with little town boards, and they've got discussion cases, but they don't sit there and decide major issues like pipelines through their ceded territory at the township or the county, and even at the state level in many cases, because it's a fiduciary trust responsibility of the United States government to uphold those resources and to protect those resources. In our estimation, the right to eat a walleye is no walleye if it's contaminated by mercury. The right to take a deer is worthless if it's got chronic waking disease. So there's a trust responsibility to protect those resources, and water is fundamental to the living capabilities of all those resources. In northern Minnesota, there shouldn't have been one breach of an aquifer, let alone 3, and Enbridge should be disqualified from ever having a permit in the United States again for those engineering errors, on top of many other ones like 22 fracking incidents, in which as they drill underneath a river at the head of the drill, they're throwing in mud, and that mud as it's going in is filling cracks, and it also lubricates, and there's 18 different varieties of it, and you can't see what any of them are because it's a proprietary right. And so those fracking fluids fill voids. And last year, and I think Joe Ferguson was on the Willow River, walking up the Willow River, and they noticed discoloration in the river, and all of a sudden they could actually see a spot where this fracking mud was pouring out from the drill site 60 to 100 feet away and out into the river. And later in the year, there were people who were doing drone shots of all the people around Enbridge sitting around at the drill site in the location, and another 150 feet down the Mississippi River, drilling fluid was just flowing out as fast as they could pump it in on the other end. Now, those are short-term mitigation circumstances, according to Enbridge and the DNR, right? For 15 days, they're doing something like that, and then they quit drilling and they shut it up, and nothing ever happens again. Unfortunately, what's happening is we're seeing on that pipeline not only aquifer breaches and and rearrangements of much of the wetlands design of those areas. But we now have drilling mud percolating out of the ground as the water systems bring those waters up in the artesian wells and wetlands and everything in discoloration. And so it's not just a 15 to 30 day impact, it's a long-term impact. And the public has a right to know what those chemicals are in their community that are leaching out into their water systems. So Wisconsin needs to do a better job. And that's what I think we've done already with the comment period is that we need quality things, asking questions. Recently we had one tribal official from the Lakota tribe here in northern Wisconsin. They settled with Enbridge a few years ago. There's a big difference between settlement and sellout. This one individual decided to write a letter and cut and pasted Enbridge talking points, like we support tribal sovereignty and we love and respect tribal sovereignty so well that we're doing this on behalf of the Bad River tribe because they asked us to take the line out of the Bad River Reservation. But the Bad River Reservation the tribal government asked Enbridge to take it out of the Bad River watershed, not just off the Bad River Reservation, out of the Bad River watershed. And so while a 14-mile line now would be replaced by 44 miles, now crosses 22 different lakes and waterbeds in Ashland County and endangers the Copper Falls aquifer, which feeds all the artesian wells and feed from Copper Falls all the way to the waterfront of Ashland on a regular basis. And they're going to use the same hydraulic process to get through the Pinocchio Range and Park Falls. The EPA has already said there's no way that area can even be protected, and Enbridge agreed. If there's a spill, there's no way that they can mitigate that particular spill in the Copper Falls area. If you've ever been up there, it makes perfect sense to me. How are you going to get an ambulance in there? How are you going to get firefighters in there? How are you going to get booms in there? You're not. And so if there's a leak down in Mellon, Wisconsin now, it will kill off the wild rice industry of Bad River. 40,000 pounds of rice a year harvested, $20 a pound. It's part of their economy. It's part of their food shelf. It's why they came from the East Coast on a migration. It makes Manoomin sacred. It makes it important, and water quality is everything when it comes to growing that crop. So you've got, and not only that, it would endanger the Wisconsin commercial fisheries, which is out in Lake Superior. It's just stupid having that line run across, and it's most expendable. So I want to quickly say that in my worldview, at this moment, an individual got in an argument with me the other day. He says, I don't like you and Winona LaDuke's politics. And I says, what is that? He says, there's no way that you're just going to shut off all the pipelines tomorrow night. And I says, wait a minute. You ever hear me say anything like that ever? Tomorrow, we're going to shut down all the gas and oil coming into the United States and going anywhere. That don't make sense. And it's not what's going to happen when we think about reality, but we can isolate line 5 at this particular moment in time and turn the tide, because even the Rockefellers don't invest in fossil fuels anymore. Enbridge has decided to depreciate their main line system to less than 19 years now of life, which means that the company itself is beginning to look at what's happening with the fossil fuel industry. And they know they're the first to go. They're a transportation company that's broken up into 50 different LLCs. For example, the Mackinac Straits Bridge is one little LLC. It couldn't afford to pay 50% of a medium-sized spill or even a full cost of a small spill in the Mackinac Straits, which limits their liability. But Enbridge always says, well, we're a big, we're a world whatever, giant Goliath. We go wherever we want to do whatever we want to do. We got lots of money when we need it, even though they told the Lakota they couldn't give them their $58 million settlement here in one lump chunk because they were broke. I just pointed out to Lakota if they had invested the $58 million by getting it in a portfolio at 5%, it would be $2.8 million rather than being fed $1.8 million or 1.5 every year for 28 years and signing a contract where the tribe and the government officials cannot disparage or say anything bad about global warming, climate change, Enbridge, the fossil fuel industry. And so the Lakota tribe at the table, the Chippewa Federation abstains from any of these kinds of issues so they don't get in trouble with their foreign corporation from Canada. I've gone through a lot of areas, and I could probably go on, but I want to say right now, at this point in the time in history, it's really line 5, the Michigan lawsuit, which is moving forward, which is similar to the Bad River lawsuit. And there've been some victories that we need to celebrate. We're having a big Treaty Days celebration on Madeline Island on September 30th and October 1st, where they're gathering all the communities united by water people, not for sale, Chequamegon Bay people. protectors from wherever they come from, Canada, Michigan, Minnesota, and just celebrating the treaties as one line of defense. But we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that Enbridge is held responsible and that the Wisconsin DNR is held responsible. And it becomes very, very difficult when you sit down and see the magnitude of the Goliath that we're fighting. Last year, Enbridge spent $300 million on Indigenous contractors. They bought every Indian they could find in Minnesota that was for sale. And some of them were my relatives that needed jobs, and God bless them, because some of them will cough a little bit and say, well, thanks, water protectors, because my contract was 4 months, and because of all the stalling and protests and everything else, it lasted 6 months. And rather than $1.2 million, the contract ended up being a $1.9 million contract, and we had extra profits and blah, 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 all that stuff. Thank you, water protectors. The fact that people are talking about this issue, thank you, water protectors. The fact that Enbridge spends a lot of time with their radar pigs and safety issues and inspectors and running around hiring people and PR people, and for the first time in 65 years paying attention to its U.S. citizens when they received all the benefits. And Bad River got 4 jobs in 1955 for that line crossing their reservation, and then they got maybe, I don't know, $8 million for the renewal. And they finally says, we want the line off our property. It's too dangerous to our resources. And Enbridge loves Bad River so well that when Enbridge sued Enbridge to get the line out, Enbridge countersued him. And not only did they countersue him and saying, no, you have to leave our pipeline in, they invoke a 1997 treaty with the U.S. government that says, my goodness, the treaty is an agreement, and we're not going to interfere with each other's infrastructures. And of course, all these other treaties you have with the Ojibwe Nation really don't count. Those were like cracker jackbox treaties. And this 1970 treaty is so royal and so important that it needs to be upheld. It's interesting that Enbridge countersued Michigan as well. But the court victory makes an interesting turning point in this battle, because what the judge ruled is that Enbridge was trespassing. So if I trespassed on your land and put up a lemonade stand and made $1 million, I can subtract all the expenses of my function, but all the profit goes to the person's land that I'm trespassing on because I profited from using his or hers land. So depending on what the judge decides now, we know that Enbridge is going to have to pay out more than $24 million they offered Bad River officially, and the $58 million they were whispering around the edges, and probably $150 they would have paid if Bad River had asked for it, because the profits running through that line for the last 10 years are probably going to be more like $500 to $600 million in profit. And that profit could go to Bad River under the right circumstances, there's a word for what they call that when you enhanced your assets at the expense of the person whose land you're utilizing to do that. And unfortunately for Bad River, if the judge says that Enbridge owes them all the profits for the last 10 years and $500 million, they might have to split it with Michigan, as the Michigan governor recently said. If the judge rules in our case that Enbridge is trespassing and they don't have an easement across the Mackinac Straits anymore under the agreement they made with Michigan, so the same rules apply, unfortunately, Bad River is going to have to share the pot. So it's like buying a lottery ticket, and you get $28 million and you got to split it with 5 people, and everyone's complaining about after taxes, there's only a couple $1 million left over. Bad River could say they don't want the money as long as Enbridge takes the pipeline out of northern Wisconsin and gives it out, because it's never been about money for the Bad River tribe and Anishinaabe people. It's been about the rice and the water. And so here's what's happening in a real easy thing. Me and you and all of us could sit down and talk about, do we all like clean water? And do we want good, pristine food for our children and grandchildren like our elders in the treaties envision? How are they going to feed themselves? We're going to put a clause in the treaty that says they have a right to hunt, fish, and gather on the lands we're giving to the United States government to use for its citizens. And so looking forward on these things at the table, when the man in black walks in with a great big candy bar and boxes and purses full of money and says, whoever makes the right decision gets this, it changes the conversation. And that brings us to how bought the structure in Minnesota was, how bought it was by 60 to 80 million dollars worth of politicking and lobbying to all the agencies and all the people, and how a foreign corporation has really bought the permitting process. And in order to help enhance that, they've done millions of dollars worth of advertising, Super Bowl ads, Facebook ads, fishing derbies, food pantries, the Birkenbeiner, the Apple Fest. And part of my philosophy has said, ask for your money now. It's the first time that Enbridge has even paid any attention to U.S. citizens. Get all the money you can, but know the difference between settling and selling out. Because if it makes you begin saying, Paul DeMain and the Indians are wrong, we need fossil fuels. How are we going to cook our eggs? Because Enbridge says we're reliant on it. Even though most of the products in their main lines that come from Canada go to Texas, most of the oil, 98% of it or something like that, maybe even if it's only 80% of the oil that comes through Line 5, goes into the United States. It ends up in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada, where it drops the price of a gallon of gas to the common Canadian citizen by 1 cent a gallon. That's how essential that line is. Because how are people in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada going to be able to survive if they have to pay 1 more penny a gallon for their gas? It's unbelievable that we would do that to them in order to protect the resources of our citizens. And Enbridge hasn't been able to get the pipeline that they wanted across the northern tier of the Great Lakes, because in Canada, you have to have a decommissioning fund for the pipelines. You put a pipe in, you got to take it out. It should be the same in the United States. You put a pipeline in, you take it out. Good jobs for union people, 35, 40 bucks an hour. And Enbridge is paying that to people now, for people that stand around and do security, sweep, set mouse traps. You want a job? Go get it. And I'm saying again, yes, I understand that people need jobs, but we can go to water infrastructure and put Michigan and many other places. There are so many infrastructure jobs that we can employ our unions at. And that brings us up to the final thing. Tim Michels, all of a sudden, people were looking at Kleefisch as being the nominee on the Republican Party. And Enbridge flies Tim Michels to Florida because Trump's the oil guy. He doesn't like Indian casinos, and so that's kind of a given. And you know why? And so Tim Michels goes down there and gets the blessing of Trump, comes back, pours $12 million into his campaign, and wins the Republican candidacy. Noting that he got a contract to construct Line 5 in January of this year. Now think about that. The guy that has the contract to construct Line 5, Enbridge's largest Great Lakes contractor, Tim Michels, failed in his past political runs, 2 or 3 of them in the state of Wisconsin. Now lives in Connecticut with his kids who go to school there, I guess. Goes, gets his blessing, comes back, wins the Republican nomination. And if he should ever become governor, and I don't think it's going to happen. He's the guy that hires the Department of Natural Resources director. It's hired and fired now under Walker. They changed it from a non-political appointment to the governor's choice or something like that. This is the guy who will oversee the DNR permit for his construction project. Talk about a conflict of interest. And I believe that we're winning this battle in the state of Wisconsin versus what I saw in Minnesota for that basic reason. Enbridge would not be pouring, they're going to pour another $300 to $400 million into just hiring Indians. They're hiring Indians left and right to whisper around about how good Enbridge and how nice it is. You can go find baseball caps at the local LCO Development Corporation down here. There's boxes of them. There's all kinds of plastic ice scrapers that are made with cheap petroleum products that are made in Singapore and Vietnam and everywhere else, because oil from Canada costs $90 to produce a barrel. And in the United States, you can frack it out at $70 a barrel, and you can pool oil for 65, 68, whatever it is nowadays. There isn't any reason to buy Canadian tar sands oil and use it in the United States, because we're supposed to be independent for oil and gas. And so most of these products go overseas and come back to Walmart for all these little cheap plastic things that Enbridge says you're reliant on, and you wouldn't be able to survive if you didn't have them every day. You read it in the newspaper, we're reliant on it, jobs, everything else. which is really a lot of good spin. So they're buying the media, they're buying the politicians, they've organized the unions to support Michels and they sent in 10,000 little postcards that said, we love Indians, we love Enbridge, we love foreign oil, we drink oil every day, get up and drink oil because it's so good for my health. So I think I'm going to wait a minute there and just ask if there's any questions or if people have something, because, you know, I could roll here. I've got a whole nother 2 pages of notes. I do want to note that the reason that there was a recent pin leak in Ashland, Wisconsin, the Joe Bates, one of our, some of the people that we've trained to take pictures and do drones and look at this stuff, went over and asked right away what's going on. And some lady said, oh, there's been a tablespoon spill here. And some foreman came over and says, it wasn't a tablespoon, it was a teaspoon. It ended up being a $2 million operation. They dug the area up. They took great big truckloads of dirt out to be analyzed. They said it wasn't a current leak, it was a historic leak. And they took out truckloads of contaminated soil, and then they put 3 big metal band-aids on it, dug it out, and those metal band-aids that's going to help that section of the line. The unfortunate thing is it's the entire line that's deteriorating. It's like a Model A that's had paint coats after coats of paint, but it's rusting from inside, and it's being stressed and it's falling apart. It didn't have an environmental impact statement. This leak, when they say it's a teaspoon leak, but they have to dig out 14 tons of dirt to get the 1 teaspoon out of the ground, mirrors the Jefferson spill at Fort Atkinson, I believe it is too, which started out for a couple of gallons, is now 1,000. Enbridge lied about it. They deferred. They cheated. They've either got cheap engineers. This company should not be doing business in the United States. So I guess I wanted to say that much. They can lose up to 91,000 gallons of product a day on their mainframe operations, because if you ever do maple syrup, you know what shrinkage is. Every time you move your product around, someone licks it and you lose a little bit, you lose in a pan, you lose it here. That's called shrinkage in the syrup industry. They can lose 91,000 gallons a day of product on their line. A bell or whistle will not go off. That's natural. Multiplied by 365 times 65 years, and you know what just is lost through a natural product along their lines, through pin leaks and teaspoon leaks and Kalamazoo's and Grand Rapids and the Russ County spill in Wisconsin, which was a very large spill in the middle of nowhere that people didn't hear about. But Enbridge has been responsible for the 3 worst spills in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota in the last 14, 20 years, whatever it is, since Grand Rapids. So I'm going to let that go and see if my grandma has anything left to say here that she can holler about, or maybe she'll, get my head buzzing and then I'll bring something up. Yeah.
Yeah, tirades.
All right,
Yeah.
go on a tirade for a while.
No. I want
need
people to
to
ask
address-
questions. I want people to ask questions they've got me at their disposal any time. They don't have you. So if
Okay,
anybody
let me
wants-
jump in then, Jill, directly to that in terms of our time. We ask people to go to the reactions section on the bottom to indicate that they want to question. Already 3 people in line. But I want to make a couple of comments from the chat to remind people, because the question is, how do we get this information out? Pam Richards has put a lot of information in the chat about the public hearing and how to make comments. In terms of the chat, at the very bottom where it says 2 and there's 3 dots, you can save the chat. You don't have to make notes on anything. That chat, that information will go into your computer. Also, Jeannie asks, how do we get this information out? Well, this is being recorded, and Greg will send out an email in a bit, usually about a week or so, that has the connection for you to get that recording. And so this is how we can continue this information. In terms of people who are in line, Mark Potachnik was in the chat with a comment, and he cannot speak, so I'll speak for him. And Mark is saying the pipeline will become a stranded asset. Paul, you want to comment on stranded asset?
Stranded assets are like the Love Canal, or when I grew up in Wausau, on Lake Wausau, there was a number of industries there that used chemicals to treat wood and everything else, and they died off and went away, and the company walked away from them. So a stranded asset is what Enbridge is doing by depreciating their lines for a 19-year of life. They recently asked some federal regulatory authority to allow them to depreciate it. And what it does is and you know how that works on your house. If you get it to depreciate it on a regular basis, it's meant to reduce your tax liability until you've actually zeroed out the value of that asset, either enhanced it with the money you've saved from depreciation, or you abandon it because it's a stranded asset. So in other words, Enbridge can get, I mean, number one, the rules and regulations over gas and oil is unbelievable. That the amount of money that taxpayers subsidize this industry at different levels. Once the Dakota Access Line was open and Warren Kelsey got oil through that one time, that's all it takes. If you have oil flow and it's shut down for some reason, you still get 110% of your investment on any particular pipeline in the United States back, because they will increase the gasoline tariff to pay that back. And it was a thing to help get infrastructure built. So you're guaranteed that. Number two, Enbridge has filed this filing with the federal government regulatory authorities, saying that they would expect that their main line could need to be abandoned in 19 years. And so they want to depreciate it so they can get all their money back out of it. And then it's worth nothing if they decide to close down one of their 57 LLCs. That's gone. And in 10 years, when they discover there was 10,506 gallons of oil that leaked into some aquifer, and a city has to change its water system, it's going to be U.S. citizens, again, who are stuck with the bill of the cleanup, because a lot of these entities just simply come and go. A stranded asset can be abandoned and you walk away from it. It's worth nothing. Enbridge isn't going to be able to sell these lines to the future, because the contracts for some of these transportation of fossil fuels and everything don't exist in the future. They know that it's coming to an end in some way, form, or fashion.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Potocnik. On the stack, we've got Jan, Terry, and I'm going to stick Charlie in there because he had a question in the chat. Go ahead, Jan.
Thank you for talking with us tonight. What happens if the DNR doesn't approve a permit for Line 5? Does the construction depend on it, or has that already been blocked?
There are numerous, I'm going to say, there's lots of permits that Enbridge has to get. Right now, they're doing everything they can on the Line 5 reroute area that's not needed in any of their major permits. So the major permits is going to be the DNR permit with all its components. They cannot start construction. They wanted to start construction in March of this year, according to their timeline. They're probably at least 2 to 3 years away from any functional permit, from what we can see based on these past permits. The question is whether or not there will be a environmental impact statement on more than just the White River on that 44-mile reroute. But what you want to remember is there is no environmental impact statement on the entire line. It went in before there was an EPA and an Army Corps of Engineer review process. So when they say we're going to reroute 14 miles and we're going to make the whole darn thing safe, this leak in Ashland, even, I think, is outside of what would have been relocated and replaced around the Bad River Reservation. So they've done everything they could on Line 5, or they're doing everything they can do. They're working up there. They're piling mats. They pile pipelines up in pipeline yards. If they can get a buy on something now, they know they don't have to pay for it 2 years ago with a higher cost. So they're doing anything that they could do without a permit, but they can't start functional drilling and line digging and so forth until they get a couple of permits. And so that's why right now Honor the Earth and many other organizations have called for, number one, independent study of what happened in the Ashland spill up there to make sure that Enbridge doesn't lie its butt out of it. I mean, a $6 million fine to Enbridge is chump money. It comes out of their back pocket. It's part of the cost of doing business. So there are these permits. The Army Corps of Engineer, I believe, is what people are calling for in Line 5 and Mackinac Straits to comment on. And it's good to say that you're against the line in various reasons, but really what really makes a difference is the challenge to the federal agencies and the state agencies to do their job properly. The initial environmental impact assessment that was put out, that was given to the tribes and everything, says this is our preliminary assessment for their preferred route. Okay, this is only the 5-line reroute around Bad River. There was actually one that hugged the reservation very, very close. It went right outside the boundary. And then this is the second one that they proposed that is called their preferred route. So it's just the one they'd like to get. The other two run down toward Drummond, down toward Hayward, because they go to the south side of the Pinocchio Range, which is going to be the very difficult thing for this engineering company to get through, because it took DOT 2 years to blast through the Pinocchio Range in the Mellon area to put in some new roadways up there, because they could only use a couple pounds of dynamite at a time because of the fragility of the Copper Falls aquifer, which is a labyrinth of old volcano deposits that filter and run that water from the Pinocchios into Chequamegon Bay. All the water in Chequamegon Bay comes out of the Pinocchio Range and moves into Lake Superior. And so that's that filtering system. It's a huge watershed system up there that's really unique and feeds Lake Superior there, where Wisconsin's commercial fishery and where tribal fishermen have always been, because that's where the fish are. And that's what Bad River is concerned. The commercial fishermen have come on board as well in some cases at Mackinac and in Lake Superior. So they're doing work. They're doing work along the Twin Line 66 from Superior all the way to southern Wisconsin as well as they can. That's been on the boards of Enbridge for a number of years. I really don't think that'll ever come to fruition, but that's why Line 3 was such a fearful thing in Minnesota. Now that they have a new easement for Line 3 through Minnesota in, it's going to probably get used for other utilities. I mean, that's part of it. And so their easement from Superior down to southern Wisconsin, there's an organization around the Stevens Point area called 80 Feet is Enough. And it's because Enbridge has been pressuring them to add footage to the easement in case they need it for the Twin Line 66. Enbridge is the kind of company that is always a couple of steps they can afford to be. So 2 years ago, when Bad River filed a lawsuit to get the Line 5 off the reservation, Enbridge also filed a federal permit to reverse one of the 4 lines that runs through the other corridor. One of those lines is a dualant. It's a highly explosive dualant. Some of it runs through screw yards and cities on that Enbridge easement through Wisconsin, very close by. It's a very highly explosive chemical that goes to Calgary, Ontario, Canada, and they take the peanut butter sludge tar sands and they dilute it out. And that's what if you look up the Montreal, Quebec train disaster a few years ago that killed several people, was a train derailment in Montreal that exploded. And that was part of the reason that was such a ferocious fire, is because that diluent is so highly explosive. So that line's been permitted. Enbridge can reverse it. And my suspicion was it was reversed just in case Line 5 doesn't go in. Right now, with stranded assets, right, with the age of the line, with the lawsuit in Michigan, with the lawsuit at Bad River, with the federal rulings about trespass and damages being paid to Michigan and Bad River, Line 5 has become profitless. And as a capitalist in a foreign corporation, I might sit there and scratch my head and said, why do I want to run oil through a facility or an asset that I cannot make any money out of? Because the battle really is about making money. Enbridge is the largest, preferred dedicated dividend payer, guaranteed dividends. You get guaranteed dividends, and they're highest in the oil and gas industry, and that's to prevent flight of investors out of there. And after some of the court cases, I'll be interested to see what the investors think about Enbridge's future, at least with Line 5, or that's the beginning of the collapse. But take your money and run, and Bad River, take your money and run, and make things unprofitable for Enbridge, at least on Line 5, because that's another good reason to shut it down, in addition to the lawsuits and opposition, and it's just the right thing to do.
All right, thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Oh, absolutely.
More
And
than
thank you for your question, Jan. Yeah, Paul, do prefer us to call you Paul or Skabewis?
You can call me either.
Okay. All right, Carrie, call him what you want.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your talk, Paul. I am interested in what you have to say about the relation of all of this to what Michigan organizations are fighting. The one I'm familiar with is, I believe it's called Oil and Water Don't Mix. And they are particularly concerned about the stretch of Line 5 that goes through the Straits of Mackinac. And I'm wondering if you have worked any cooperation with them, and that, I mean, the whole line is a bad thing.
Absolutely. I've been over to their Waters Life Festival for the last 10 years since they've been fighting this pipeline. I went over there during the winter and stayed with one of their camps, their resistance camps. We did several videos that are at the live stream at Indian Country TV website from interviews. We have members of that coalition that meet with the Line 5 coalition in the Chequamegon Bay area on a monthly basis. Our attorneys in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin have separate conversations with each other because, you know, for example, the lawsuit on behalf of Manuman or Wild Rice in Minnesota, the Rights of Nature lawsuit, is an 1855 treaty authority authorized lawsuit along with Ojibwe tribe. Wild rice is wild rice in the ceded territory, whether it's the United States or Canada or whatever. So a victory for wild rice in Minnesota is a victory for wild rice in Wisconsin or Michigan or wherever wild rice is within the ceded territory. So you go to communitiesunitedbywater.com, you go to Honor the Earth, you know, Google Stop Line 3, Stop Line 5. You're going to get to these two websites hosted by Honor the Earth. There's other ones. There's probably about a dozen other organizations that have their own websites, but Honor the Earth is the one that I'm connected with, has a huge hub of operations that meet on a regular basis. So yeah, there's coordination and discoordination. You know that Enbridge has filed several SLAP suits, you know, against Sierra Club and other organizations in an attempt to bankrupt them. And the Sierra Club is, you know, not talking and organizing as much as it used to be. Greenpeace is not doing as much because they're getting these huge lawsuits and even the Bad River lawsuit that Enbridge filed against them and asked for 100,000 pages of email documents between tribal officials, anything that said Enbridge in the last 10 years. And one of the recent court decisions on behalf of Bad River was the judge saying that Enbridge has got to quit asking questions about what people were thinking when they did this kind of theory. And the judge finally got mad and says, I don't care what they were thinking. They're legislators on the Bad River Reservation. They have a right to think. Right. And so the judges brought that part of the lawsuit to a halt, while the other lawsuit, which is the Bad River versus Enbridge lawsuit, was the trespass one. Number one, it was good victory to have Enbridge declared a criminal. And that gives a little bit of added assets to the Bad River tribe, but nowadays I guess people can try to overthrow governments and depose presidents and stuff like that, and a lot of things don't happen to them. So, you know, I don't know what the reputation for criminals is nowadays in this society, but at least that's a declaration. In the Michigan lawsuit in the same case is coming up. So yes, there is cooperation. I'm not going to call it coordination. I'm going to call it, you know, the Chequamegon Bay area knows best what it can do. Honor the Earth doesn't coordinate their events. We come in and support. Okay. If, you know, maybe we can sponsor a feast because we always eat. Maybe we can bring puppets down because the kids love puppets and the kids get involved with water issues. And the Communities United by Water has a different philosophy in part than the Minnesota battle and the DAPO battle. And it's simply this. In Ashland, Wisconsin, we don't say the E word. it's just a horrible thing to go walking around about E's doing this and we're bothered by E doing that. And that, that foreign corporation, it's ill, it's out of balance. I don't want to slay it. I want to bring it back into balance and make those people up there realize and come to their senses about what they're doing and saying, why don't we just shut down the dirty tar sands altogether? And at least that's a start. I'm not saying turn everything off today. I'll repeat that again. Don't turn off everything today, but we got to get there at some point. We want to see decommissioning lines and other things like that. So there's lots of cooperation between the groups, and what can we do as organizations to step in and uplift those local communities who know best for themselves what to do. And at Mackinac and Bad River and Squamigan Bay, they know what they're doing. They've fought battles before like this, and they've won. They have a history of winning. Yes, Hand?
Yes, Skabewis, Wikipedia you are. Thank you. And thank you, Terry, for that question. Charlie, you want to jump in next in terms of your question in the chat?
Sure. Real quick. Apparently, the demonstrations against Line 3 did not stop Line 3. What can be done differently to try to slow or halt the construction on Line 5?
Everything that you're doing now, you can't, you have to believe me that what happened at Line 3 was a victory for water protectors. It put everyone on notice. Right now, today, there was a huge suit that said some county in northern Minnesota violated the civil rights of water protectors by blockading an easement to a piece of land that they were camping on, and that county is going to get sued. There are several lawsuits by individuals. One of them might be on this panel. I don't want to say anything in particular and jeopardize her situation in any way, but there may be grounds for a lot of lawsuits in northern Minnesota as these things work themselves through the court system, the rights of nature lawsuits and some of the things. We have a lawsuit that we filed 4.5 years ago against the Army Corps of Engineers, Honor the Earth, and Midwest Environmental Advocates, and several other people joined in on it. That's still filtering its way through the court system at the local level, and it'll probably be declared mute or whatever they say, that moot. Yeah, it might be declared moot at some particular time, but there are still legal precedents being made. And so I see the actions in northern Minnesota and even at DAPL. If we hadn't have done that, no, we didn't stop the oil, but we put the world on notice that we're willing to put our lives on the line. Now, there are, there's a lot of negative things that can happen in that. We had people who were injured both physically and psychologically. We had people that went up there who threw their body on the line because of their love for other people, who hadn't told their mother they were going to go to jail, or their boss, or their children that they might end up in jail. And so people have to think about what they're doing in terms of resistance. Now, Enbridge got their eminent domain in the middle of the night under Scott Walker in the budget bill at 2 a.m. Because they wanted to do that. That's what the influence of a foreign corporation has on the Republican ticket to get what they want to do. Enbridge got their felony trespass. It's interesting that they're being charged with trespass since they pushed this felony trespass bill because someone threw a rock at a cab in Superior, Wisconsin. And when I asked the politicians, would you please introduce, if you're going to do that, please introduce some legislation that says that it's a felony to shoot at Indians at 11 o'clock at night who are fishing in a northern Wisconsin lake under their treaty rights, because they couldn't do that. And I was told there's no political willpower to pass that kind of a bill. And so I says, then why did you do this one? And there were no good answers to that question. It was the political process. It was money aligned. It has unions that are being turned against environmentalists on the Democratic side of things. They're convinced that I don't know what they're going to convince there'll never be another job, but they could go to get, everybody who wants a job nowadays has a job, and you could go do nice infrastructure works. They could build a replica of the Eiffel Tower up in the Pinocchio Range, and the tourists can go up and marvel, and you could put all your people who do welding and everything to work at $35 an hour and preserve the environment and have people go up there and admire the pristine environment of the area. And some union worker says, well, that's not a bad idea, but now we got to go back and untalk everyone about these unholy alliance, you know, where the environmentalists and tree huggers are messing up a particular class of union people who are going to vote for Tim Michels because he's such a good boss and he just gave us a raise for $5,000 last year. Now we can afford to donate $2,800 the maximum to Tim Michels and other pro oil company lobbyists. I hope I'm not speaking too fast for people to hear me. Someone said that the other day. They says you jam a lot in, slow down.
Oh, you're jamming it in there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Charlie, for that question.
Mhm.
Tom Seary's up next, and you know, you almost segued us into the political thing right there, Paul. So let's hold that, and let's hold Jill after Tom Seary, so we cover the political end. All right. All right. Hey, Tom.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I'm running late there. Paul, let's see. I assume you're aware that there are 5 states attorney generals who are suing the fossil fuel companies. Then 5 different states that's going on. There's about 20 communities that are doing that as well in many states throughout the United States. There's another group not connected to this group who's formed a little over a year ago, and we've been putting pressure on Josh Call to sue like these other states are doing. We've had a meeting with 3 of his staff. Those staff attorneys are very up to date on the legal process, the legalities, and how they can pursue a court action to recoup the damages done by fossil fuel companies. So, and I heard you mention earlier, there are some lawyers who are working with you to try to stem this. And I guess I would like to see if I can get them involved in this with this group and yourself to bring these damagers, people who damage our world and our lives, to court, just like big tobacco, just like some of the other big lawsuits that went on in the last number of years, to bring this to court and have the fossil fuel companies, Enbridge, etc., pay for the damages that they're doing to our state. That's so. I'm gonna get to the lawyers where the lawyers. What are the lawyers? I need to get the lawyers talking to Josh Call, and I need to get those folks together. So is there a way that you can get a hold of them, or?
Well, let me cut in here because I've been part of Dean Mueller's group and the global warming group. I've been in and out of their meetings a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I'm aware of the meetings with Josh Call, and I think we want to make sure in Wisconsin, and it's always temperamental when you want someone to file like a disenfranchisement lawsuit against Tom Tiffany and Ron Johnson for being supporting the insurrectionists, and the Attorney General doesn't buy into that for whatever particular reason, or these lawsuits. I'm aware of the other states, but I think it's not a bad idea for a call from a political point of view to really look at what's happening with these other lawsuits, because in Indian country, this happens very often. If we all get involved in one lawsuit, we have one chance, and if it's thrown out of court, we're all done. If we have several lawsuits in several states, we begin looking at what's successful and what's working up the chain of command in terms of evidence, because as evidence comes out and accepted by the courts and accepted by juries, there's a lot of precedent setting things. I mean, I'd love to have Josh file a lawsuit and hold him accountable, but the best strategic issue might be to allow these other states to filter these cases out to see where they go first. And I know that the Attorney General is on top of these other lawsuits and analyzing them. Now, can we put pressure on Mandela Barnes? Can we put pressure on Tony Evers? Can we put pressure on Josh Call? Yes, we should. We should put them on notice and talk to them, and sometimes simple letters just accumulate, and they got to say, look, we got to do something. Now, our attorneys are typical attorneys. Midwest Environmental Advocates is located in Madison, Wisconsin, I believe, and have their attorneys there as well known as the attorneys for the Sierra Club and other things. There's a team of them. I think they know each other. I've seen people trade information, so I know some of them know each other. But if you're going to hunt for a good environmental attorney, what you want to do is watch these other cases and see who's winning a case, and really see if you can't bring on board those people as consultants, because a lot of times that's layered. You've got attorneys that have already tried a case that are now working for attorneys in Wisconsin who have to work with jurisdictional issues and laws and treaties and other things that are different from state to state, and the protections for consumers are not the same in each state as well. So lots of layers, but keep doing whatever you're doing. I mean, asking questions of me and who's a good attorney. Keep hunting around and asking. What you want to find is some young guy who can think out of the box and think about a theory that nobody's talked to that might be a winner, because sometimes you get in a room, you get 8 attorneys in a room, you got 8 opinions, and they're all right according to their view, and some of them are losing arguments in the long run, and very dangerous as well. So you want to be careful about where you go with this. So what's going on with the current lawsuits, I think if our attorney general is in consultation with those people, that may be the best thing to do as of today. That's that.
Okay, thank you.
I was looking for the name of that organization here, and I couldn't find it real fast, but they were having monthly meetings too on global warming, and let's see if I can find the name of that group.
Yeah, I'm on that group sometimes too. I've got other things that I try to do, so I picked up. But I don't remember you having been at one of those meetings, so that's why.
Oh yeah, I've been in a couple of them, and they're pleading me to come back so I can talk a whole lot more. And I'm saying I'm pretty busy, but I will be there if some other things come up as much as I can. The fight against Line 5 is as much a fight against global warming and the fossil fuel industry as anything else. And if we can lend weight to that, our organizations have and will in the future.
Good. Thank you.
Good.
Well, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Tom. We have not had much discussion on the political campaign in terms of what's his name? I don't want to say his name.
Yeah, that guy.
And Jill's been on the chat, and we've held her back. And with the limited time, we've got 5 minutes.
So
I think we should get to the political.
Well, let's spend the last 5 minutes or so with Jill as to what's happening on the organizing and with the Michels connection with Line 5. You're very involved with that.
Okay, well, here's the one thing that really struck me is that I had no idea that Tim Michels, who got the Republican nomination, was Michels Corporation, Tim. I didn't know that until one of the water protectors and I were driving downtown Milwaukee, and she saw the Michels building, and she starts going, I'm like, wow, what are you doing? And she goes, well, that's Michels. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? So if I didn't know that,
right,
99% of the people in this state do not know that. And he's not talking about it. He's talking about what a great businessman he is and how many people he employs and, $500 million a year, business. And that he wants more business for his business when he is elected the governor. And I just became incensed by that prospect. And so have spent the last several weeks, 24 hours a day, doing research on him, putting together this Facebook and Twitter page, which is Never Michels WI. you know, I'm not going to get into what a bad guy is because you all know that. But one thing I want to say, you know, along with what Paul said about, you know, especially the Clearbrook frack out and piercing of the artesian aquifers, that was Michels. You know, everybody says when this stuff happens, you know, Fort Atkinson, Michels, Kalamazoo, Michels. Everybody always says Enbridge because they're the, you know, they're the head of this thing. But who's doing the work? Who's doing the construction? Who's doing reckless, careless work and absolutely disavowing all the permits? You know what they were told they couldn't do, just totally disregarding it. And so I think that's real important. There must be some kind of a thing between Michels and Enbridge that if they go ahead and, you know, we said on the last meeting that Paul and I were in, that, you know, when I was living in the ditch up there at the Mississippi River, Enbridge went 24 hours a day. They lit up the entire huge arena with all these, you know, lights and worked through the night. You know, how great a job can you do when you're doing it? And they do this to push things done and get it done while all these court battles are going on. They want to get it done before any of that, and they're doing a really careless job. When Michael says, you know, oh, I don't need to be the governor, you know, I'm a rich guy, but you know, I'm doing it, you know, for service, he says. Yeah, he's doing it for self-service. I also got a hold of his, and this is really troubling because as I see this in Tom Siri, you may be able to comment on this. I've got here his, let's see if you can see this, statement of economic interest that he's required to file for office. Paul, I sent you this today. This is 25 pages. He has got, this is an unbelievable conflict of interest. He has 13 corporations, not one, he has 13. That is a huge conflict of interest. On his statement here, he has to list investments that he has that are over $50,000. He has more than 50 of them. Over, you know, these ones are between 5 and 50,000. You can see well, there's one X on this page. All of them are 50 grand and over. These are major conflicts of interest. And Wisconsin statute, what is it here? 19.45 states that it is a violation of public trust for a public official to realize substantial personal gain for himself, family, or organizations. Michels is $1 billion private corporation. You cannot find anything about Michels. It is unbelievable. He must have someone 24/7 scrubbing the internet for anything that pops up that might not be pro Michels, and things I've seen that I went back and tried to find gone. Even on Wikipedia, they're constantly changing who and what Tim Michels is because you can go in there and alter it, which, you know, that's on my to-do list. So in this, anybody that wants this, his financials, because I think too, Tom, I think that there's some substantial omissions. I think his answers to this are incomplete. He also put the wrong date with his signature. He put 2021. I don't know if that matters, but I noticed that, so I can send this out to anybody who wants that. I also was able to dig up, you know, again, with him talking about what a great businessman he is and how much all employees love him because he's such a nice guy and all that. Well, I was able to find on Good Jobs First, violation tracker, many safety violations, you know, federal and state pages of those. So I've also got that. So what I'm doing with all this information, actually on Sunday, Michels is going to be in Green Bay, and he's being sponsored by a group that last year their guest speaker was Kyle Rittenhouse. So you can imagine the people that are going to be attending this. So it's Sunday evening, and I organized an event. We're not going to counter protest. We're going to make our presence known. We're going to be in prayer. I'm going to be handing out, I made some information sheets. Why not Michels? That, isn't just about, about the pipelines, all the other reasons. And what I'm trying to get across to people is this, even though, between us, we know where, which side of the aisle I fall on, but this is not a partisan issue. This is not a political issue. This is a survival issue. And when you tell people that, and when you explain that, we are so remarkably blessed to have these Great Lakes surrounding us. And, we've talked about all the water catastrophes going on. Everybody's going to be coming in here for fresh water because it's the only fresh water that's going to be left. And when I say to people, fresh water is a non-renewable resource. When it's gone, it's gone. And you explain that to your kids because you are responsible for those children to have a healthy, thriving planet so that they can have a happy, healthy, fulfilled life. And so I'm finding I've actually gotten a few people to get that component of it. And that's something that I've said it took me decades to learn in my activism, is that especially when you're talking to white people, you have to make it about them and theirs, or they tune out in the first sentence. I noticed that with my water protector work. You talk about treaties, they're gone. I don't talk about treaties. I got nothing to do with treaties, and I'm out. Same thing in the Black Lives Matter community. You talk about the police, killing all these young Black boys. White people are out. Nah, we don't care. You got to talk about how that's going to affect their taxes, all the lawsuits that are coming from the police violence and the shootings. And do you like your libraries? Do you like your parks, your schools? Well, all these lawsuits got to come from somewhere. They got to pick a kitty, which they're going to take from, which is the same thing that's going on with these pipelines, like Paul was saying. This, Enbridge got a lot of money, but there are a lot of lawsuits coming down the pike, and I'm going to be one of them. So what I'm doing right now, we're going to this event in Green Bay. It's held by Turning Point Action, and Governor Ron DeSantis is going to be there. Go figure.
Cool.
This is gonna be fun. And Paul, I think Holka's gonna come to drum for us and hold space. And so, like I said, this is going to be, and there's going to be a lot of people. From what I understand, this is circulating underground a lot because I didn't want to put it. I've got the Facebook page, Never Michels WI, and also on Twitter. And I put information on there, but I'm not, when I'm going to hold an event, I'm not going to put that out there so that, all the Trumpies can come and harass us. But, so what here's one of the buttons that I made for it. I don't know if you can see that. It's probably shiny too much. It's got never, oh, there we go. Never Wisconsin, Stop Line 5, Save the Great Lakes, and Deport Enbridge. We need to ask questions. Why are we allowing a foreign corporation to come through our pristine lands, water, poisoning all of it, poisoning the air, poisoning everything that lives in the watersheds, everything that needs the watersheds, the birds, the animals that come to feed on it, and eventually us, because when that fresh water is gone, what are we going to irrigate our crops with? How are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? Because, seeds don't like oil. And so when I talk to people in that way to say, hey, this does affect you. This is not an Indigenous issue. This is not this is not a crazy environmentalist or climate activist. This is survival. This is about your survival is what, again, you got to bring it to them and theirs. So I've been working really hard on this, and I've got a lot of people coming on board, and I think we're probably at the 150 mark, and it's only been up for a little over a week, people that are on it. But so I'm asking all of you to go and sign up on the page. And I also, today, I didn't put it up yet, but I also started a GoFundMe for it because I've spent my last 2 months electric bill on making all these things. And of course, you know me, I'm the sign person. So I've made a lot of signs and banners for the events that we're going to be doing. And also, once, we get known for our actions, never Michels, we're going to take it to the Capitol, and we're going to put the screws to Evers and say, what are you going to do about this? Because you've been silent. And you can't be silent anymore. I'm tired of the silence. I know everybody in Minnesota was tired of the silence. I was tired of Keith Ellison not talking about it. At least to me, I know I sent him a message and I said, I'd like to have a meeting with you because I have a lot of questions. And you're about the only one that can answer them, and that's your job. And I'm real tired of the avoidance. And it's the same issue here. I brought it up to Mandela Barnes when I saw him at the event that Peace Action had. And I kind of cornered him on that issue to let him know, you can talk about everything else and that's great, but let's start talking about climate action. Let's start talking about the environment. And yeah, I'm really excited about the Chicago thing because that is some kind of, yeah, don't even get me off on that one. See, my blood pressure just went through the roof and I just got done having heart failure. So I got to be careful with that. So anyway, I'm looking for your support on this. Both, helping me out with any of the things, helping financially. I know, the driving up to Green Bay. I'm going to take this campaign. We've got 54 days left or something. I put it up on the Facebook page. And if I have the resources, I can do more. Also, another side note, when you see residences that have those huge Michels signs, that's illegal. I called the city of West Dallas about it. You can have 24 square feet, and those are 32. So they said if you give them the address, they will go and tell them to take them down. And I know they do that because they did it to my son when he had a big Obama sign. So, so that's, there's a lot of suggestions on Never Michels. And again, it's your level of comfort jumping in, what you want to help with. Again, I'm a frontliner, so I'm going to be out there, but I'm not expecting everybody to do that. But in the little bit of time we have left, I really could use some help with this. So we can't allow this to happen. And really, Tom, if you could get me answers, I'll send you his financials. And if you can give me answers on A, that it's incomplete, and B, that this is a massive, he should not even be allowed to run, period. So that's something I'd like an answer to. You can help me out with. Tom is an attorney himself. So it's probably why he was asking those legal type questions. So anyway, that's pretty much what I'm up to here.
Thank you so much, Jill.
You're welcome. I appreciate your support. You're always supportive of me and the crazy things I sometimes do, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Oh, you inspire
We
us.
appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Paul, so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah,
And
thank
I guess it's getting late. It's time for us to move on. Oh, yes, Paul.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I was getting ready to wave and say, thanks for having me
Goodbye.
and keep going and a badass, give me your information on all that and we'll figure out how we can support you a little bit in different ways and move on. I appreciate what you're doing and I appreciate what you're all doing. I appreciate the fact that you spent some time with us tonight to talk about it. It's your time is important. But we do.
Paul and Jill, thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Okay, good night.